Hello everybody, welcome back to General Science. In the last video, we talked about chemical reactions generally, and now today we're going to talk about them with a little bit more detail. First things first, we need to talk a little bit about how chemicals react with each other. And there's a couple of different ways that they do that. The first way is called an ionic bond. Okay, so when two elements bond together to form some sort of new compound, they can do that with what's called an ionic bond. And basically, what happens is, if you remember back to when I was talking about electrons and orbitals, and I was telling you that atoms want to have full orbitals. They don't want to be empty, they don't want to be missing electrons. And so what they'll do is they'll give up or take on electrons to feel like they have the full amount that they're supposed to. And so what will happen is, let's say, let's talk about salt, because we talked about that already. Sodium has one extra electron than the full amount to make it feel stable and good. And so what that sodium will do is it will give up that electron, and then it'll have that full orbital shell and won't have that extra one floating around. And that'll make sodium feel good. And when it does that, it becomes an ion. An ion is just an element that's become charged because it's either gained or lost an electron. So that sodium now has a positive charge, so it's lost one negative charge. On the other end, chlorine has one less electron than it needs to have a full orbital set. And so it could take the electron that sodium gave up and become a -1 charge ion. And now, because these two atoms are charged, they will be attracted to each other. Remember, positive charges and negative charges are attracted to each other, so they will kind of stick together and become sodium chloride. That's how salt is created, through an ionic bond. There's another type of bonding too, called covalent bonding, and that's where mostly gaseous elements share electrons collectively to create bonds. So, for example, water is H2O. That is an example of a covalent bond. Oxygen and hydrogen are the two hydrogens are sharing their electrons in kind of a pool instead of giving and taking like in an ionic compound. Now that we have that out of the way, we understand how elements actually combine together. We can move on to the types of chemical reactions and how they're made. So there are four basic types of chemical reactions that we generally talk about in chemistry, and we're going to go through each one of them right now. The first one is a synthesis reaction. A synthesis reaction is where you take two things, maybe sodium and chloride like we talked about, and you add them together and you make something new, salt. And that's a synthesis reaction. You're making something new. The next type of reaction is called a decomposition reaction, and that's when something that's already been put together is taken apart. Okay, so you're taking something that you've already made and maybe breaking it into its pieces. That's a decomposition. You're decomposing it. The other two really only happen with these ionic compounds we're talking about. Okay, the first one is called a single replacement reaction. And basically what happens is, let's say we had salt, sodium chloride, and we had a new metal we wanted to replace sodium with. Let's say lithium. Okay, lithium is very similar to sodium chemically. Okay, so what would happen then is you've got your sodium chloride, and the lithium would come in and bop the sodium out, and then you'd have a new compound, lithium chloride, and the sodium would go away. Right? That would be a single replacement, right there. Just one thing was changed in this ionic compound. Now, the other new one that I'm going to talk about is a double replacement, and that's where basically I think of it as like a flip-flop, right? If you have two compounds that are ionic in nature, and they basically just flip-flop their pieces. So let's say you had sodium chloride again and lithium fluoride. Okay, they're both very similar compounds, and if you put them together, maybe they would flip-flop and they become lithium chloride and sodium fluoride. And those would be two new compounds that would then be off doing their thing. Those are the four main types of basic chemical reactions. Now, of course, there are other types, and we'll talk about those a little bit as well. But I just want to make sure we covered our four basics. There's a synthesis, decomposition, single replacement, and double replacement. Okay? And those all mostly work in this ionic sphere, right, where we have ions reacting with each other to form ionic compounds, right, a positive and a negative coming together. Now, another type of reaction that's really important to know about is what's called a combustion reaction. And if you know what combustion is, right, that's when things light on fire. So when you get in your car, right, and you're burning gasoline to get your car going, that's a combustion reaction that's happening in your car that's allowing it to drive forward. Right? Combustion reactions are special types of reactions because they have very specific guidelines as to how it becomes a combustion reaction. Okay? Combustion reactions, the reactants have to be what's called a hydrocarbon, so something made of carbon and hydrogen, sometimes oxygen. Those are hydrocarbons. And then you also have to react it with oxygen. And you need to supply some heat to get this reaction to get going, right? It doesn't just happen spontaneously like some reactions do. You have to actually get it going by adding some energy to it. Okay? And so what happens then, right, is the hydrocarbon reacts with the oxygen and it creates three products. And that's the important part, the three products. The first product is always water. So it's always going to create some sort of water, some amount of water. Okay. The second thing that it's going to create is carbon dioxide. Now, if you've been studying anything that has to do with climate or environmental science, you would know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that's that helps create the protective barrier that's keeping heat within the earth. Okay, so whenever we're burning a hydrocarbon like gasoline, right, we're creating carbon dioxide, and that's where a lot of that environmental science stuff comes into play, right? How can we not use hydrocarbons as fuel anymore because that's creating a lot of carbon dioxide? It's all connected, science. Okay? And then finally, the third thing that's created in a combustion reaction is heat or energy, right? And that's the kind of stuff that we're powering our cars with or heating our homes with, right? And that's what we're trying to stop doing. We're trying to move away from using these reactions to fuel our society and find cleaner ways that make less CO2 to provide us with energy. So that's our fifth type of chemical reaction there. We had our combustion reactions. And now the last type, this is kind of the more advanced type of reaction that we'll talk about in this, is an acid and base reaction. Okay? Acids and base reactions are kind of similar to ionic reactions, mechanism-wise. At least that's how I think of it. And acids and bases really deal with moving what are called protons around, or hydrogens. Okay, regular old hydrogens, when they are ions, are H+, and these protons are incredibly reactive. Having just one bare naked proton, right, with nothing to protect it from other things, is incredibly reactive. And that's what makes up most acids, these free-floating hydrogen protons, right? They're so incredibly reactive, and that's why they can do things like burn you, right? Because they're reacting with your skin and your bones and all that stuff, and that burns you because it's tearing apart the molecular structure of your body. And so an acid and a base, right? Bases are the opposite of acids. They accept these hydrogens and make it so that they don't react with other things. These acids and bases, when they react with each other, they neutralize each other, or they attempt to. Okay, and so an acid-base reaction is simply a reaction where an acid and a base react to create water and a salt. And a salt is just any ionic compound that is basic. You know, one positive ion, one negative ion, salt. Okay, so salt actually has a higher, broader definition than just NaCl. It's technically anything in that kind of category of compounds. So now that we've talked about, at least mentioned all of these different types of chemical reactions, in the next video, we're going to start talking about how we as scientists write these things out and understand how they work. And so we're going to be talking about chemical equations in the next video. And then after that, we'll probably do a little bit more acid and base work, and then we'll be done with chemistry. We'll be moving on to the next science. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you're learning something about chemical reactions. And next time, we'll learn some more. Thanks for watching again. Bye.